A broken artist watched her soul sold, then she was dragged into darkness, her desperate plea echoing unheard. But a ruthless billionaire, a silent predator in the shadows, had been watching. He didn't just save her from ruin, he annihilated her captors, claiming her with a terrifying, absolute fury. Now she's trapped in his golden cage, wondering if her freedom was just traded for a more dangerous master. The scent of turpentine, stale coffee, and something vaguely metallic, the lingering ghost of cheap disinfectant from the building's hallway, clung to Alara Vance like a second skin. It was a familiar aroma, as much a part of her small, two-room apartment as the faint tremor in her hands when she worked. She sat hunched over a canvas propped precariously on an overturned crate, her brush moving with practiced, almost frantic precision. The flickering bulb above cast harsh shadows, making the vibrant blues and fiery oranges of the street scene she was sketching seem muted, almost apologetic. She wasn't painting for herself today. This was for Mrs. Rodriguez, the kindly, perpetually worried owner of the corner bodega, a portrait of her late husband from a faded photograph. It would earn Alara enough for another week's worth of groceries and a small copay for the clinic. Her younger sister, Lyra, coughed softly from the next room, a delicate, almost ethereal sound that nevertheless sent a jolt of ice through Alara's veins. Lyra, 16, with eyes that held too much wisdom for her age, was her anchor, her reason for enduring this suffocating existence. But Lyra was also a constant source of quiet dread, fragile health, a ticking clock Alara could never quite silence. The doctor's words echoed in her mind, a relentless drumbeat. We need to monitor her closely, Alara. The medication helps, but it's a temporary solution. We need to find a root cause, and that requires resources. Resources Alara didn't have. Resources she was slowly, agonizingly, selling off her very soul to acquire. A gust of wind rattled the single, grimy windowpane, a mournful symphony accompanying her despair. Alara shivered, not just from the chill seeping through the cracks in the old building, but from the cold grip of memory. The ghosts of her past were relentless, whispering doubts and fears into the quiet corners of her mind. You're too emotional, Alara. Too raw. People will take advantage. That was Julian, her former mentor, his voice a silken trap, dripping with praise that quickly curdled into control. He had been the first to discover her, to see the spark in her early works. But he hadn't wanted to nurture it. He wanted to own it. He had convinced her that her art was too avant-garde, too difficult for mainstream appreciation, that only he understood how to market her. He'd signed away her early collections, promising exposure, but instead, he'd subtly altered her works, claimed them as his own collaborative pieces, and then, when her name started gaining whispers of recognition, he'd brazenly stolen her entire debut exhibition. The devastating legal battle that followed had left her emotionally scarred and financially destitute, the memory of her art being paraded under another's name a brand on her spirit. She remembered the feeling of betrayal, the crushing weight of public humiliation when her claims were dismissed as the ramblings of a naive, emotional artist. She's talented, yes, but clearly unstable, one critic had written, swayed by Julian's well-placed connections and smooth lies. That's when she started hiding. Alara Vance ceased to exist in the art world. She became anonymous, a shadow, painting portraits of strangers for meager sums, her true, vibrant style locked away in her most private canvases or channeled into the quick, expressive strokes of her street art, signed with a simple, untraceable, it felt safer that way, invisible. If no one saw her, no one could hurt her. If no one knew her art, no one could steal it. But even anonymity had its limits. The world had a way of finding your soft spots, especially when you love someone more than yourself. Lyra. Her sister's pale face, her weakening breath, the silent plea in her eyes, they were the relentless push that had driven Alara back into the clutches of another predator. Arthur Vane. The name itself tasted like ash in her mouth. Vane, the proprietor of the Gallery Noire, a fitting name, Alara thought, for a place that dealt in shadows and stolen souls. He had approached her like a serpent, charming and persuasive, offering a lifeline when Lyra's medical bills had reached an insurmountable peak. He promised a platform, recognition, a chance to finally elevate her art. But his contract, thick with legalese and insidious clauses, had been a cage disguised as a golden opportunity. She had signed away the rights to Echoes of Dawn, her magnum opus, a sprawling canvas pulsating with the raw emotion of a sunrise over a storm-tossed sea. It was the painting she had created in her deepest solitude, a defiant scream against the silence of her stolen past. Every brushstroke was a piece of her resurrected spirit, a testament to her unyielding hope. And now Vane owned it. He was going to auction it. Tomorrow. A chill, sharper than any breeze, snaked its way up her spine. A sleek, cream-colored invitation lay half-buried under a pile of old sketches on her chipped wooden table. It had arrived 3 days ago, a cruel taunt. Gallery Noir cordially invites you to the exclusive Spring Gala auction, featuring the compelling new acquisition, Echoes of Dawn, by the enigmatic artist. Eve mocked her, a thin veil over the complete erasure of her identity. Vane had made sure there was no mention of Alara Vance, only the artist known as E, a faceless entity whose work he now fully controlled. She traced the embossed letters on the card, her fingers trembling. The memory of signing that contract, her hand shaking as she scrawled her pseudonym, was a fresh wound. Vane's smile, too wide, too knowing, had been etched into her nightmares ever since. A true artist understands sacrifice, Alara, he had purred, his eyes glinting with a predatory hunger she had foolishly dismissed as passionate ambition. You'll thank me later, when your sister is healthy and your name is whispered in the hallowed halls of art. He hadn't mentioned that her name would be a ghost, her talent a commodity he owned, to be sold off to the highest bidder. He hadn't mentioned that he would parade Echoes of Dawn like a trophy, stripping it of its raw personal power, reducing it to mere pigment on canvas, valued only by its market price. Alara pushed the half-finished portrait aside, a wave of self-loathing washing over her. She was a failure, a fraud. She couldn't even protect her own art, let alone her sister. The canvas of Echoes of Dawn floated in her mind, its bold colors a stark contrast to the dull gray of her reality. How could she let them sell it? How could she stand by and watch her last vestige of hope, her most profound expression, be auctioned off by a man who saw her as nothing more than a puppet? She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, the sound jarring in the oppressive silence. She walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cold glass. The city lights twinkled below, a million tiny stars indifferent to her despair. Tomorrow, her soul will be sold. And she, Alara Vance, the woman who once painted with fire in her heart, would be utterly, irrevocably invisible once more. But this time, it felt like she would disappear forever. A desperate, wild thought sparked in the depths of her mind, a tiny ember in the vast darkness of her fear. She couldn't let it happen. She wouldn't let it happen. Even if it meant shattering the fragile peace she had built around her anonymity, even if it meant risking everything, she had to try. But what could a penniless, invisible artist do against the formidable, ruthless machinery of Arthur Vane's empire? The answer, echoing in the suffocating silence of her apartment, was nothing. Absolutely nothing. And that realization, heavy and crushing, was almost enough to break her. Almost. There, in front of the gallery, Noir shimmered with the city's opulent breath. Limousines, sleek and silent as predatory beasts, glided to the curb, disgorging figures clad in designer silks and tailored wool. The crisp autumn evening, usually a welcome chill, felt like a judgment against Alara. She stood across the street, huddled in her threadbare coat, the ruffles scratching her skin, a stark contrast to the shimmering fabrics catching the glow of the gallery's golden lights. Her worn sneakers felt inadequate on the polished pavement. Each scuff marked a testament to a life spent struggling, a life this world utterly disdained. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of pure, unadulterated terror. What are you doing, Alara? You'll only make things worse. You'll be invisible anyway. Always have been. The insidious whispers of doubt, so familiar, tried to drag her back, to anchor her in the suffocating safety of anonymity. But then, Lyra's face flashed in her mind, pale, fragile, her eyes holding a silent plea for more time, for a chance. And Alara knew she couldn't back down. Not tonight. Not for Echoes of Dawn. The gallery's facade was a masterpiece of understated wealth, dark, polished marble, gleaming brass accents, and immense glass doors that offered tantalizing glimpses of the treasures within. She could almost smell the expensive perfumes, the dry scent of old money, the faint metallic tang of ambition that hung heavy in such places. It was a lion's den, and she, a lamb, was about to step inside. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through her, but she swallowed it down, forcing her feet forward. Each step was a battle, a tiny victory against the paralyzing fear. Inside, the atmosphere was a heavy cloak of hushed murmurs and clinking champagne flutes. The space was vast, bathed in a soft, almost reverent light that made the artworks glow like sacred relics. The polished floors reflected the dazzling chandeliers overhead, creating an illusion of infinite, untouchable grandeur. Uniformed waiters glided through the crowd, offering delicate canapes and sparkling drinks on silver trays. Everyone seemed to belong, to carry an air of effortless entitlement. Alara felt a jarring disjunction, like a raw, exposed nerve amidst perfectly sculpted marble. Her old coat felt like a costume, a cruel joke. She moved through the throng, a ghost among the living, her eyes darting through the shimmering tapestry of wealth. Her gaze, however, was fixed on one thing: echoes of dawn. It hung on a pristine white wall at the far end of the main hall, spotlit like a star. The vibrant blues and fierce oranges, usually so full of defiant life, seemed muted, almost imprisoned, by the sterile elegance of the gallery. A wave of profound grief washed over her, a physical ache that tightened her chest. This was her soul, her defiant scream against the world, now just another commodity to be bought and sold. Her attention was momentarily diverted by a sudden shift in the energy around a discreet, velvet-roped VIP section near the main stage. A ripple of deference passed through the immediate vicinity as a man, dark and imposing, sat in a deep leather armchair. Alessandro Rossi. The name was a whispered legend in certain circles, a man of immense power, both seen and unseen. He was dressed in a suit so impeccably tailored it seemed to have been forged around him, emphasizing the broad expanse of his shoulders and the controlled tension in his frame. His dark hair was slicked back, revealing sharp, angular features that hinted at a ruthless efficiency. He held a phone to his ear, his posture relaxed yet utterly commanding, his voice a low rumble that was impossible to discern amidst the polite din, yet it carried an undeniable weight. His eyes, dark as polished obsidian, scanned the room with a preternatural calm, missing nothing, judging everything. There was a dangerous stillness about him, a predatory grace that set him apart from the chattering crowd. Alara felt a prickle on the back of her neck, a subconscious alarm bell ringing at the sheer, palpable force of his presence. He was a lion, and this was his domain. He was in the middle of a crucial whisper negotiation, his words carefully chosen, each syllable carrying the potential for empires to rise or fall. He was about to close a multi-million-dollar deal, a subtle consolidation of power under the guise of an art acquisition, when a sharp, desperate voice cut through the polite murmurs of the room. "You can't sell that. It's mine." The sound was raw, unpolished, a jarring cacophony in the perfectly orchestrated symphony of the auction. Every head turned. Even Alessandro Rossi paused, his thumb hovering over the end call button on his phone, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. His security detail, massive men in sharp suits, shifted almost imperceptibly, their gazes already fixed on the source of the disturbance. It was Alara. She had pushed her way through the parting crowd, her coat flapping around her like a broken wing. Her hair, usually confined to a messy bun, had escaped in wild tendrils around her flushed face. Her eyes, usually downcast, were now blazing with a fierce, desperate fire fixed on Vane, who stood smugly by echoes of dawn. She was a whirlwind of raw, untamed emotion in a room designed for elegant control. "Arthur Vane, you manipulative bastard," she cried, her voice trembling but gaining strength with each word. "You stole my art. You trapped me in that contract. This painting, this is my soul. You have no right." A collective gasp swept through the room. Whispers ignited like wildfire. "Who is she? Is this a stunt?" Vane's face, usually a mask of composed arrogance, contorted into a furious snarl. "Security! Get this woman out of here. She's a trespasser, a deranged artist trying to sabotage my event." Alara ignored him, her gaze sweeping over the indifferent, curious faces in the crowd, pleading for understanding, for justice. But she saw only judgment, annoyance, and thinly veiled disdain. She was just a spectacle, a momentary diversion for their privileged boredom. Then her eyes locked with his. Alessandro Rossi. He had lowered his phone, his negotiation forgotten. His dark gaze was fixed on her, an intensity that bypassed her disheveled appearance and burrowed deep into her very being. It wasn't pity. It wasn't simple curiosity. It was something deeper, more predatory, yet laced with an unnerving, almost magnetic pull. He saw past her despair, past the cheap fabric of her coat, to the raw, pulsating heart of her defiance. He saw the flicker of the artist's soul, fighting against annihilation. He saw a kindred spirit in her hidden fire, a vulnerability he could exploit or perhaps protect. Alara felt her breath catch in her throat. His gaze was chilling, yet mesmerizing, holding her captive in the middle of the suddenly silent hall. She felt exposed, stripped bare, every raw emotion laid out for his dissection. Her defiance, her fear, her desperation, He saw it all. Vane, regaining his composure, stormed towards her, his face a mask of purple fury. You have ruined everything, you ungrateful wretch. You think this will help you? I'll sue you into oblivion. You'll never paint again. I'll make sure you're blacklisted from every gallery in this city. His words were poison, designed to crush her, to make her retreat into the invisibility she had once sought. And for a moment, they almost succeeded. Her shoulders slumped. The fire in her eyes flickered, replaced by a devastating wave of hopelessness. She was just a small, broken artist against a giant, ruthless machine. As Vane's burly security guards, already moving with chilling efficiency, reached out to seize her, Alara felt a profound sense of defeat. This was it, her last desperate act of rebellion, ending in shame and public ostracization. She wouldn't just be invisible, she would be erased. But even as their hands reached for her, she felt that intense gaze from the VIP section still fixed on her. Alessandro Rossi. There was no flicker of amusement, no hint of judgment in his dark eyes. Only a deep, calculating assessment, and something else, something that hinted at a storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. He had seen her, truly seen her. And in that moment of utter despair, just as the guard's fingers clamped down on her arms, Alara met his gaze one last time, a silent plea in her eyes. Alessandro Rossi merely watched, a muscle in his jaw ticking almost imperceptibly, his expression unreadable, yet undeniably, profoundly interested. The guards began to drag her away, her feet scuffing uselessly on the polished floor, her protests dying in her throat. Her eyes never left his, even as the distance between them grew, even as the opulent doors of the Gallery Noire slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate. What she didn't know was that as the doors closed, Alessandro Rossi finally made a call. His voice, when he spoke, was low, dangerously calm, and laced with an icy resolve. Dante, he murmured into the phone, his gaze still fixed on the now empty space where Alara had stood. I want everything. Everything about Arthur Vane. And everything about the girl who just left. Find out what he's done to her. Find out everything. The hunt had begun. The biting night air outside the Gallery Noire offered no solace, only a harsher reality. Alara stumbled onto the grimy pavement, her heart a frantic, wounded bird beating against the bars of her ribs. The security guards, hulking shadows of Vane's authority, had thrown her out with casual disdain, their muttered threats about legal action and restraining orders ringing in her ears like a death knell. You'll regret this, Miss Vance. Arthur Vane doesn't tolerate insubordination. The words, venomous and precise, felt like a brand. Humiliation burned a fiery path across her cheeks, even in the cold. Her vision blurred with unshed tears, but she blinked them back, refusing to grant Vane even that small victory. She walked, almost ran, through the labyrinthine streets, the glitter of the city lights a mocking backdrop to her spiraling despair. Her lungs ached, not just from the exertion, but from the crushing weight of her failure. Lyra. What would she tell Lyra? She had risked everything, publicly shamed herself, and for what? To be dragged out like a common criminal, her pleas unheard, her art still destined for the butcher's block. The memory of Alessandro Rossi's intense, unblinking gaze flickered in her mind, an unsettling, almost hypnotic image. Had he seen her desperation, her raw vulnerability? Or had he simply dismissed her as another public nuisance, a fleeting interruption to his gilded world? The thought made her stomach churn. He was a creature of that world. After all, a silent, powerful predator. Why would he care about a broken artist? Over the next few days, the fallout was swift and brutal. A curt, official-looking letter arrived, slipped under her apartment door, smelling faintly of expensive paper and legal threat. It was from Vane's legal team, a formal warning of a lawsuit for defamation and breach of contract, demanding immediate cessation of all further attempts to interfere with the sale of her works. The language was cold, precise, designed to crush any last vestiges of defiance. Alara read it, her hands trembling, the stark black text swimming before her eyes. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a tightening of the chains. She gathered every ounce of courage she possessed, clutching the dreaded letter, and sought help. The small community legal aid office was a world away from the gleaming opulence of the auction house. It smelled of worn carpets, old books, and quiet desperation. The lawyer, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, listened patiently, her expression growing graver with each passing word. She reviewed the contract, her brow furrowing deeper. Alara, the lawyer finally said, pushing her glasses up her nose, the fluorescent lights reflecting harshly off the dense legal clauses. This is exceptionally binding. Mr. Vane's team is thorough, almost predatory. They've covered every angle. You sign away your rights, your ownership of Echoes of Dawn, and any future works he chooses to claim under this agreement. She sighed, a sound heavy with regret. There's very little, if anything, we can do without substantial funds for a lengthy, complex legal battle. Funds, I imagine, you don't have. The words were a death sentence. Alara felt the last flicker of hope extinguish, leaving behind only an echoing void. She nodded, unable to speak, the metallic taste of defeat coating her tongue. Her chest tightened, making each breath a shallow, painful effort. The contract wasn't just ironclad. It was a cage without a key. She left the office, the bustling city outside feeling sharper, crueler, its indifference a bitter balm. She was trapped. Completely. Utterly, the subtle chill began to seep into her days, a growing, unsettling sensation. It started small, a fleeting shadow at the periphery of her vision when she was sketching in the park, a car she'd seen parked on her street for a little too long, the faint click of a door closing a floor above her just as she entered her own apartment. Her artist's eye, always attuned to detail, now picked up on these anomalies with unnerving precision. She would find herself pausing mid-stroke, brush frozen against canvas, her head cocked, listening to an imagined whisper, a phantom rustle. Her paranoia, once a quiet companion born of past trauma, now blossomed into a full-blown, terrifying certainty. She felt watched. Always. When she bought groceries, she instinctively scanned the aisles. When she visited Lyra at the clinic, her gaze lingered on strangers in the waiting room. The sense of an unseen presence, cold and constant, clung to her, a suffocating shroud that made her jump at every unexpected sound, every sudden movement. Was it Vane, sending his goons to remind her of her place? Or was it something else, something darker, more insidious, born from that terrifying moment in the gallery when she had locked eyes with a mafia boss? The unknown was a gaping maw, threatening to swallow her whole. Meanwhile, in the hushed, leather-scented sanctum of Alessandro Rossi's private office, the world outside was a meticulous chessboard, and he the grandmaster. His mahogany desk, polished to a mirror sheen, held only a single expensive tablet, displaying intricate legal documents and surveillance reports. He had listened to Dante's initial findings, his expression unreadable, his dark eyes absorbing every detail. Arthur Vane, Alessandro mused, his voice the low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the room. He leaned back in his plush chair, a faint aroma of expensive Cuban cigar smoke clinging to his tailored suit. A small-time predator, playing in the big leagues. And the girl. Alara Vance. He savored the name, testing its sound. A true artist, shackled by a paper-thin existence and a monstrous contract. Interesting. Dante, lean and efficient, stood opposite the desk, his hands clasped behind his back. Vane acquired her work through questionable means, Don Rossi. Exploited her desperate financial situation for her sister's medical treatment. He has a history of these predatory acquisitions. Julienne Moreau, her previous mentor, was even worse. Stole her early works, blacklisted her from major galleries. That's why she started painting anonymously. Alessandro's eyes, usually cool and calculating, flickered with a strange, almost dangerous light. He'd recognized that look in her eyes at the auction, the fire beneath the fear. He understood exploitation. He dealt in it sometimes, but always on his terms, with a code. Vane had no code. He was a leech. In Alara, she was a vibrant, untamed force that had been systematically suffocated. So she makes herself invisible to survive, Alessandro murmured, a faint, almost imperceptible curve playing on his lips. But her art, her soul, it refused to be silenced. He tapped a manicured finger on the tablet, bringing up an image of Echoes of Dawn. The raw power, the defiant beauty of the painting, even on a screen, was undeniable. He saw her in it, the passion, the vulnerability, the hidden strength. I want eyes on her, Dante, Alessandro commanded, his voice sharpening, stripping away the contemplative tone. Discreetly. Every day. Her routine. Who she interacts with. Everything. And I want a full, comprehensive dossier on Arthur Vane. Every asset. Every debt. Every dirty secret. I want to know where the pressure points are. I want to know how to make him disappear without a trace in the legitimate world. Dante nodded, his expression unreadable. Consider it done, Don Rossi. He turned to leave, but Alessandro's voice stopped him. "And Dante," he added, his gaze returning to the image of Alara's painting, his dark eyes now burning with a nascent, terrifying possessiveness. "Ensure she comes to no harm. No one touches what I'm observing." From that moment, Alara's invisible life became Alessandro's personal canvas. He watched her from afar, through the eyes of his men, and sometimes from the tinted windows of his car, parked strategically on a quiet side street. He saw her haggling for art supplies at a small, independent store, her brow furrowed with concentration as she stretched every penny. He saw her in a park, sketching quick portraits for tourists, a forced smile on her lips, her movements economical, her gaze wary. He saw the way she would subtly check her surroundings, her hand instinctively moving to clutch her worn bag. He noted the dark circles under her eyes, the slight tremble in her hands even when she was focused on her art, the fierce protectiveness in her expression when she spoke to Lyra on the phone. The contrast between the defiant fire she had shown at the auction and her quiet, almost desperate daily struggle captivated him. She was a paradox, a fragile bird with the heart of a lion, trying to hide in plain sight. And the more he watched, the more his calculated interest deepened, twisting into something far more potent. It wasn't just about Vane's injustice anymore. It was about her. About the way her spirit refused to break, even when every circumstance conspired to crush her. He saw the strength beneath the fear, the resilience beneath the despair. He saw the woman who belonged to the art, not the poverty, not the exploitation. He felt the stirrings of a new kind of obsession, a hunger to possess not just her talent, but the artist herself. To peel back the layers of fear and anonymity she had built around herself and see the full, vibrant spectrum of her soul. To be the one who finally made her truly seen. Alara, unaware of the serpent's gaze that meticulously followed her every move, only felt the shadows lengthen, the whispers grow louder. The world was closing in, its edges sharp and threatening. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that something was coming. She just didn't know what or who would finally drag her out of the shadows. And as the day of the second auction loomed, a sense of impending doom settled over her, heavy and suffocating. She was a mouse in a maze, and the predator was already on the hunt. The Gallery Noire pulsed with a subdued, expectant hum, far more oppressive than the frantic energy of the previous auction. Today was not about chaos. It was about calculated acquisition, about the ritualistic transfer of valuable assets. Alara stood hidden in a secluded alcove near the back, clutching a plastic cup of lukewarm water, its chill doing little to quell the inferno raging in her stomach. The air, thick with the scent of aged canvas, expensive floral arrangements, and the faint, cloying sweetness of Vane's signature cologne, felt like it was pressing in on her, stealing what little air she had left to breathe. She wore the least conspicuous dress she owned, a faded black shift that swallowed her form, hoping to blend into the shadows. Her hands, paint-stained despite her efforts, were tucked into the pockets, knuckles white from the tension. Her gaze was fixed on the raised dais at the front of the main hall, where Arthur Vane, resplendent in a charcoal suit that looked as sharp and unforgiving as his personality, held court. His smile, usually a predatory smirk, today was stretched into a mask of smug satisfaction, broadcasting his triumph to anyone who cared to look. This wasn't just about selling her art. This was about selling her. She knew it in the deepest, most terrified corners of her soul. Vane had made sure of it. The whispers had reached her even in her self-imposed solitude. Vane is revealing his new protege today, an enigmatic talent. Rumor has it he holds all her rights. He was orchestrating a public display of ownership, cementing his control, and erasing her completely. The thought was a sickening, suffocating weight. Ladies and gentlemen, Vane's voice boomed, amplified by hidden speakers, cutting through the refined chatter like a knife. Welcome. Today, we stand on the precipice of a new artistic era. An era defined by raw talent, meticulously nurtured and masterfully presented. His eyes, like a viper's, swept over the expectant faces of the elite, lingering, almost mockingly, on the back where Alara stood. A shiver, icy and sharp, ran down her spine. He knew she was here. He wanted her to witness her own obliteration. He continued, weaving a narrative of his own genius in discovering her, painting her as a wild, untamed artist he had bravely brought into the light. And now, he declared, his voice rising to a crescendo, I present to you the future of contemporary art, the unparalleled vision of a spotlight, blinding and merciless, snapped onto a colossal canvas veiled in black velvet. Echoes of dawn. Alara's breath hitched. She could feel the pulse of the painting even from here, a vibrant beat that was being systematically muted, flattened, by Vane's possessive rhetoric. He spoke of its brilliant composition, its commercial viability, never once touching upon the raw emotion, the struggle, the piece of her soul poured into every stroke. It was a dissection, not an appreciation. Her body trembled uncontrollably. She wanted to scream, to shatter the illusion, to tear down the velvet and reclaim her truth. But her voice, already hoarse from silent anguish, felt lodged in her throat. She was small, insignificant, bound by paper and legal jargon. Her defiance at the last auction had been futile, a foolish, desperate gasp for air that had only tightened the noose. Today, she was to be truly silenced. Vane paused for dramatic effect, letting the whispers and gasps ripple through the room. And now for the piece de resistance. He gestured grandly. Before we begin the bidding for Echoes of Dawn, I have an announcement that will redefine the future of this young, promising artist. Effective immediately through a series of mutually beneficial agreements, he emphasized the mutually beneficial with a condescending sneer. Gallery Noir, under my esteemed direction, will exclusively represent all future works by. Furthermore, we have acquired complete creative control, ensuring that this raw talent is molded into a universally appreciated and commercially successful phenomenon. His words were a calculated blow, precisely aimed to cripple her, to steal not just her past, but her entire future. Alara felt a searing pain rip through her chest. Creative control. That meant he owned her hand, her vision, her very soul. He would dictate what she painted, how she painted, effectively turning her into a machine to churn out his vision of her art under his name. She was no longer an artist, she was a brand. His brand. Tears, hot and stinging, finally breached her defenses, tracing paths through the faint smudges of paint on her cheeks. Her vision blurred, the opulent room dissolving into a kaleidoscope of meaningless colors. She was crushed. Utterly, irrevocably crushed. She felt the weight of every lost dream, every stolen credit, every silent struggle bearing down on her. This was the end. The final, devastating erasure. Just as Vane, with a triumphant flourish, raised his gavel, a sudden, almost imperceptible shift occurred in the atmosphere. The gentle murmur of the crowd faltered. A palpable silence descended, thick and heavy, like a velvet curtain dropping. It started at the back of the room, near the main entrance, and spread outwards, silencing conversations, freezing champagne flutes midair. Then a figure stepped forward. Not from the chattering crowd, but from the shadows of the entrance itself, a presence that commanded the space without effort. Alessandro Rossi. He moved with a quiet, lethal grace that was utterly at odds with the frantic energy of the auction house. His dark suit, perfectly tailored, seemed to absorb the light, making him a walking silhouette of power. His eyes, dark as midnight and sharp as a razor, swept across the stunned faces, dismissing them, before settling with an unnerving intensity on Vane. No, not just Vane. On Alara. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a thunderclap in the room. Vane, momentarily flustered, lowered his gavel, a bewildered frown creasing his brow. Mr. Rossi, he stammered, his usual swagger evaporating under Alessandro's unwavering gaze. A pleasure. We were just about to begin the bidding for our esteemed new acquisition. Alessandro cut him off, not with words, but with a deliberate, slow raise of his hand. In it, he held a single, crisp document. Not a bidding paddle. A legal paper, official and unforgiving. He walked slowly, purposefully, towards a dais, his gaze never leaving Vane's increasingly nervous face. Each step was a measured beat in a silent, terrifying countdown. The air crackled with unseen energy, a storm brewing in the heart of the gallery. He reached the dais, stopping directly in front of Vane, whose smug smile had been completely replaced by a mask of confusion and a nascent panicked fear. Alessandro's voice, when it came, was a low, dangerous rumble that resonated through the room, silencing even the frantic beating of Alara's own heart. Mr. Vane, he began, his tone deceptively calm, yet laced with an icy precision that promised irreversible damage. Your esteemed new acquisition is no longer yours to sell. Nor, for that matter, is your gallery. A collective gasp, far more potent than any Alara's outburst had elicited, ripped through the room. Vane's jaw dropped, his face paling, a slow, dawning horror replacing his earlier arrogance. What were you talking about, Mr. Rossi? This is preposterous. Alessandro ignored him, a flicker of cold satisfaction in his dark eyes. He held up the document for the entire room to see, its bold heading visible even from a distance: Notice of Acquisition, Gallery Noir, and all associated holdings. Effective as of this morning, Mr. Vane, Alessandro continued, his voice resonating with an unshakable authority. I have acquired all interests in Gallery Noir. Every asset, every property, every contract, including, naturally, the entirety of your esteemed collection and the future works of it. His gaze, cold and merciless, locked onto Vane. Your reign of predation in the art world is over. Vane stumbled backward, grasping for the edge of the dais, his face ashen, his empire crumbling around him in real time. You can't. This is illegal. I have connections. I have. You have nothing, Alessandro stated, his voice devoid of emotion, a death knell to Vane's delusions of grandeur. He then turned, slowly, deliberately, his dark gaze sweeping over the bewildered, shocked faces of the elite. And then, his eyes, dark and fathomless, found Alara, still trembling in her alcove, utterly stunned. For a moment, their eyes locked across the expanse of the silently reeling gallery. Alara saw it all in his gaze, the strategic triumph, the cold, decisive fury, and then a subtle, almost imperceptible softening as his eyes met hers. It was a possessiveness that was terrifying, yet paradoxically, it held a hint of something akin to a fierce, protective tenderness. His voice, though still commanding, dropped a fraction, the power now aimed directly at her, a private declaration in a public forum. Her art and her future are no longer yours to exploit, he declared, his gaze unwavering from Alara. They are mine to protect. The words echoed in the stunned silence, a chilling, absolute statement of ownership that simultaneously stripped Alara of her agency and offered her an undeniable shield. Her despair, so profound just moments before, fractured, replaced by a profound, bewildering shock, mingled with a fragile, dawning relief. Vane, now a broken man, was being escorted away by Alessandro's own security, sputtering impotently, his face a contorted mask of ruin and disbelief. The sophisticated elite, once captivated by Vane's performance, now watched Alessandro with a mixture of awe, confusion, and a sudden chilling understanding of the true power that moved beneath the city's glittering surface. Alara stood frozen, the warmth of the lukewarm water, cup in her hand, a distant sensation. Her heart still pounded, but no longer from fear of Vane. It beat now with a wild, terrifying rhythm, caught between the terror of a new, unknown master and the unbelievable, undeniable truth that she had, somehow, been irrevocably saved. But at what cost? And what did it mean to be his to protect? The question hung heavy in the air, a silent, powerful promise and a formidable new cage, gilded in gold and wrapped in shadows. The transition from the echoing desolation of the Gallery Noir to the hushed opulence of Alessandro Rossi's world was jarring, a dizzying, almost violent displacement. One moment, Alara was being dragged, humiliated, from the gleaming marble. The next, she was propelled into the plush, leather-scented interior of a sleek black sedan. Alessandro sat opposite her, his presence a dark, formidable anchor in the moving vehicle. He hadn't spoken a word since his pronouncement, his silence more potent than any shout, his gaze, though not directly on her, a palpable weight in the confined space. Alara felt herself shiver, despite the car's controlled warmth. The city outside blurred into a smear of indifferent lights, her old life receding into an impossible distance. The journey seemed endless, a passage into another dimension. When the car finally glided to a silent halt, they were not on a familiar street. It was a private driveway, winding upwards towards a towering edifice of glass and steel that pierced the inky sky. This wasn't a mansion, it was a fortress in the clouds. Alessandro stepped out first, and one of his men, a silent, granite-faced giant, opened Alara's door. She hesitated, her foot hovering above the polished curb. Where was she going? What was happening? Come, Alara. Alessandro's voice, low and resonant, cut through the night air. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command, softened just enough to be bearable. She swallowed, her throat dry, and stepped out. The penthouse lobby was an expanse of cool, pale marble and soaring ceilings, filled with the faint, expensive scent of lilies and polished wood. Every surface gleamed, reflecting her own disheveled image back at her, a stark, unwelcome contrast. They ascended in a private elevator, its interior clad in dark, hushed wood. The ride was unervingly smooth, carrying her higher and higher, away from the world she knew, into a realm of untouchable power. When the doors silently parted, Alara stepped into a space that stole her breath. It was immense, a panoramic vista of the city spread out below, a glittering tapestry of human endeavor. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the sprawling urban landscape, making her feel as though she stood on the edge of the world. The decor was minimalist, yet luxurious. Deep-seated leather sofas, abstract sculptures that seemed to breathe, and walls adorned with art, real art, not the commercially sanitized pieces Vane peddled. The silence here was profound, broken only by the soft hum of the ventilation and the distant, almost imperceptible thrum of the city. "This is your new home," Alessandro stated, his voice devoid of unnecessary inflection, yet resonating with an unshakable finality. He moved with an effortless grace that spoke of absolute comfort in his own domain. Alara could only stare, her mind struggling to reconcile this breathtaking grandeur with the grimy reality of her past apartment. It was a gilded cage, magnificent and terrifying. Her internal monologue was a frantic scramble. Home? Is this a prison? What does he want? How can I ever repay him? Or is this payment itself? Gratitude warred with a primal fear of the unknown, of the unspoken terms. She felt a profound disorientation, like a compass spinning wildly without a true north. The first undeniable wave of relief came when Lyra arrived. Alessandro had wasted no time. Within hours, Lyra was transported from her modest clinic bed to a private suite within the penthouse, attended by a team of the city's top specialists. Alara watched, tears streaming down her face, as Lyra, pale but serene, was hooked up to state-of-the-art equipment. The doctors spoke in reassuring tones, their voices hushed and professional. "We'll run comprehensive diagnostics, Miss Vance. The Dawn has spared no expense. She'll have the best care available." To see Lyra resting peacefully, finally receiving the care she desperately needed, was an overwhelming, pure joy that cut through all of Alara's apprehension. In that moment, holding Lyra's frail hand, all fear of Alessandro faded. He had saved Lyra. He had given her sister a chance. And for that, Alara knew she would owe him everything. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. It bound her to him in a way no contract ever could. Days bled into a bewildering week. Alara found herself in a routine that was both alien and strangely comforting. Her needs were anticipated before she even voiced them. Food appeared, exquisitely prepared. Clean clothes, simple but luxurious, replaced her worn attire. Yet, despite the abundant luxury, she felt a profound sense of unease. She was a guest, a ward, a possession. The thought was a bitter pill. Then, Alessandro led her to a large, sun-drenched room on the penthouse's north side. When he opened the double doors, Alara gasped. It was an art studio. Not just a room, but a sanctuary. Massive skylights bathed the space in natural light, a dream for any painter. Easels stood ready, canvases of every size stacked neatly against a wall, and long tables overflowed with an astonishing array of paints, brushes, charcoals, and pastels. The faint, clean smell of fresh canvas mingled with the earthy scent of new pigments. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, magnified 100-fold. "This is yours," Alessandro said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, almost tender. He gestured around the immaculate space. "Everything you need. No restrictions. No deadlines. Just to create." Alara walked into the room, her fingers trailing over a stack of pristine linen canvases, a tremor running through her. It was too much. Too perfect. A gift of such magnitude, it felt like a heavy chain. Her internal conflict raged. Is this truly freedom, or just a more beautiful prison? Will my art still be my own if it's painted within his walls, with his resources? She felt a longing to seize a brush, to lose herself in the vibrant colors, but cold apprehension held her back. This wasn't earned, it was bestowed. Later that evening, after ensuring Lyra was comfortable, Alara found Alessandro in his personal library, a cavernous space filled with leather-bound books and the scent of old paper and rich cedar. He was seated in a deep armchair, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, the city lights twinkling behind him like distant stars. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. "Mr. Rossi," Alara began, her voice barely a whisper, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I don't know what to say. For Lyra, for the studio, it's more than I could ever have imagined." Alessandro took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes, dark and assessing, never leaving her face. Gratitude is sufficient, Alara, but what do you expect from me? The question hung in the air, blunt and terrifying. She had to know the terms of this gilded cage. Her autonomy, her dignity, demanded it. He finally set his glass down, the soft clink echoing in the vast room. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze pinning her. I expect you to live, to create, to stop hiding. His voice was low, devoid of emotion, yet it resonated with an undeniable power. I expect you to exist fully and without apology, under my protection. Protection? Her voice hitched. From what? From whom? From everyone, he stated simply, his gaze hardening. From the vultures like Vane who would exploit you. From your past that sought to control you. From any shadow that dares to touch what is mine. The last words hung in the air, a chilling declaration. Mine? Not her art, not her talent, but her. The possessiveness was absolute, terrifying in its quiet intensity. Alara felt a visceral jolt. It wasn't just a physical sensation, it was a profound shift in her understanding of her new reality. He hadn't just saved her, he had claimed her. Her old fears of being controlled, of losing herself, resurfaced with a vengeance, warring with the profound relief of Lyra's safety and the breathtaking generosity of his provisions. But my freedom, she whispered, her voice trembling. My choices. A faint, almost imperceptible curve touched Alessandro's lips. You are free to paint, Alara. Free to heal. Free to be everything you were meant to be. My protection merely ensures that no one else dictates your choices ever again. He paused, his gaze softening just a fraction, a predatory gentleness that was far more unsettling than overt aggression. You chose to fight, Alara. You chose defiance. I simply ensured that your fight would not be in vain. And now you are safe. Here. With me. He rose slowly, his towering frame casting a long shadow over her. He walked towards her, his movements silent, deliberate. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic cadence. She should step back. She should assert herself. But something in his gaze, a magnetic pull, held her rooted to the spot. The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken tension, a potent mixture of fear and an undeniable, forbidden curiosity. He stopped just a few feet away, close enough for her to catch the subtle, expensive scent of his cologne, a complex blend of oud and something darkly masculine. He lifted a hand, and for a terrifying, thrilling moment, Alara thought he might touch her. Instead, his long, elegant fingers merely brushed past her, settling on a heavy art book on a nearby table. You will want this, he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. A first edition on Renaissance portraiture. I believe you will find inspiration. He slid the book towards her, his gaze holding hers. Rest now, Alara. Tomorrow, your new life truly begins. And know this, you are no longer invisible. Not to me. Not ever again. He turned and walked away, leaving Alara standing alone in the vast library, the heavy art book in her trembling hands, its leather cool against her skin. The silence of the penthouse pressed in on her, but it was no longer an empty silence. It was filled with the echoing weight of his words, of his possessive gaze, of the unspoken promise that she now belonged to him, body and soul. The golden cage had closed around her, and she was both terrified and undeniably, irrevocably captivated. She wondered, with a shiver of apprehension and a reluctant thrill, what this new life would demand of her, and what depths of the mafia boss's world she was truly stepping into. The dedicated art studio, bathed in the soft, ethereal glow of the penthouse skylights, had become Alara's solace, her gilded sanctuary within the gilded cage. The scent of fresh oil paints, clean turpentine, and the subtle metallic tang of new canvas filled her lungs, a welcome contrast to the lingering, faintly cloying aroma of wealth that permeated the rest of Alessandro's domain. She had spent weeks pouring her soul onto canvas after canvas, each stroke a vibrant scream of newfound freedom, a defiant celebration of Lyra's slow but steady recovery. The finest medical minds, courtesy of Alessandro, had made astonishing progress. Lyra was improving, truly improving, and with each positive report, a knot of suffocating anxiety loosened in Alara's chest. For that, she knew she owed Alessandro everything. But even in this haven of artistic liberation, the subtle tension persisted. The hum of the penthouse, almost imperceptible, was a constant reminder of the unseen systems at play, the cameras, the guards, the silent, watchful eyes. She was free to create, yes, but always within his walls, always under his vast, encompassing gaze. It was a trade-off she had accepted, a necessary bargain for Lyra's life. One cool, crisp afternoon, as Alara was lost in the intricate details of a sprawling cityscape, a formal, heavy envelope appeared on her pristine drawing table. It hadn't been there moments before. It was simply there, a silent intrusion. Her heart gave a sudden, painful lurch. The paper was thick, embossed with a familiar, elegant crest, the same crest that had once adorned the invitations to Julian Moreau's exclusive gallery openings. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up, the smooth, expensive paper feeling like a venomous snake in her hand. The return address was a prestigious art gallery in another city, an address Julian had used for his collaborative exhibitions, the ones where he had subtly altered her work and claimed it as his own. A wave of ice-cold dread washed over her, chilling her to the bone, making the vibrant colors on her canvas seem dull and lifeless. He found me. The thought was a sickening whisper in her mind, tearing open old, festering wounds. She hadn't seen Julian, hadn't heard from him since the devastating legal battle, since she had deliberately faded into anonymity. He was a ghost she had desperately tried to outrun. With agonizing slowness, she opened the envelope. Inside, a single, professionally printed card. Not an invitation. A personal note, in Julian's elegant, infuriatingly confident script. My dearest Alara, how wonderful to hear of your resurgence. And with such an influential patron. I always knew you had a spark, my little muse. A shame you doubted my guidance back then. Perhaps now you understand the value of proper direction. I'll be in the city next week. I expect we can discuss a collaborative future, one that truly reflects your newfound appreciation for advantageous relationships. Yours, in anticipation, Julian. The words were a calculated strike, precisely aimed to rekindle his psychological grip. My little muse. Proper direction. Advantageous relationships. Each phrase was a key, unlocking a vault of painful memories, his patronizing praise, his subtle criticisms that chipped away at her confidence, his insidious control over her schedule, her clothes, even the way she spoke about her art. He had made her believe she was nothing without his guidance, a fragile creature incapable of navigating the cutthroat art world alone. He had fed on her insecurity, stolen her voice, and left her a hollow shell. Her hands shook violently, the note crinkling in her grasp. The air in the studio, once a haven, now felt thin, suffocating. The vibrant colors on her easel seemed to mock her, remnants of a confidence she felt rapidly draining away. She closed her eyes, fighting a rising tide of nausea. She could almost hear his smooth, manipulative voice, feel the subtle pressure of his hand on her arm, guiding her, controlling her. Her carefully constructed sense of safety, the fragile peace she had found under Alessandro's protection, threatened to shatter. The fear of Julian was a deep, primal one, not of physical harm, but of the insidious, soul-crushing control he wielded. He specialized in making her invisible, in stealing her very self. She squeezed her eyes tighter, trying to push him away, but his face, handsome and deceptively charming, appeared in her mind's eye. The subtle judgment in his gaze, the way he would dismiss her ideas with a condescending smile. He had taught her to fear her own voice, her own power. And now he was back. She instinctively crushed the note in her fist, wanting to tear it, burn it, erase its very existence. But the feeling of being watched, a constant undercurrent in this luxurious penthouse, made her pause. She was no longer truly alone. Alessandro learned of Julian's interference swiftly, as he learned of most things that touched his world. Dante, ever vigilant, presented the crumpled note, retrieved from Alara's studio after she had left it momentarily for Lyra's room. Alessandro's office, usually a bastion of quiet control, filled with a palpable stillness that was far more terrifying than any storm. He picked up the note, unfolding it with precise, unhurried movements. His dark eyes scanned Julian's elegant script, a muscle ticking almost imperceptibly in his jaw. There was no outward display of rage, no shouted commands. Only a chilling, icy calm that radiated from him like a palpable force. Julian Moreau, Alessandro murmured, the name a whisper of contempt. A parasite. A relic. He attempts to re-enter my domain. His gaze, sharp as obsidian, lifted to Dante. He believes her patronage is merely an advantageous relationship to be exploited. A dangerous glint entered his eyes. He doesn't understand. She is not a commodity for him to manipulate. She is mine. Dante merely nodded, awaiting instructions. He knew the Don's moods. This cold fury was far more potent than any volatile outburst. Initiate full surveillance on Moreau, Alessandro commanded, his voice low, deceptively even. Every contact, every asset, every vulnerability. Contact my associates in city where Julian's gallery is located. He paused, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the vast city skyline outside his window. I want his current gallery to lose its funding, its artists, its reputation. Slowly, systematically, but irrevocably. He then added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a chilling undercurrent of absolute finality. And ensure he receives a personal message. Nothing crude, nothing traceable. Just a very clear understanding that if he ever attempts to contact Alara Vance again, or even breathe the same air as her, the consequences will be devastating and permanent. Make it clear he is to disappear. Not just from her life, but from the art world entirely. From society itself, if necessary. Dante inclined his head, a silent acknowledgement of the chilling directive. Understood, Don Rossi. He turned and left, his footsteps silent, leaving Alessandro alone in the vast office, the city stretching out below, oblivious to the quiet, terrifying machinations of its unseen master. Alara felt the shift before she understood it. The oppressive weight of Julian's impending presence began to lift, subtly at first, like a heavy fog slowly dissipating. The phantom calls she imagined, the shadows she instinctively braced against, began to recede. News from the art world, which she sometimes caught glimpses of online, spoke of Julian Moreau's gallery suddenly facing unprecedented financial difficulties, key artists abandoning him, and his latest exhibition being mysteriously postponed. The whispers were of a silent, powerful force moving against him, an unknown entity systematically dismantling his empire. He was being erased, piece by piece. A profound, dizzying relief washed over Alara, so intense it left her breathless. Julian was gone, truly gone, not just from her sight, but from the very world he had used to exert his control. She knew, without a shadow of a doubt, who was responsible. Alessandro. He had moved with a terrifying efficiency, a silent, unseen serpent striking at the heart of her tormentor. But with that immense relief came a new, unsettling realization. Alessandro's power was absolute, his reach limitless. He had protected her, yes, but in doing so, he had demonstrated the terrifying depth of his control. Julian, her past demon, had disappeared, and she was free. But she was free only within the confines of Alessandro's vast, unyielding protection. He had claimed her world and proven irrevocably that no one, past or present, could challenge that claim without facing his silent, devastating wrath. As she stood in her studio, bathed in the evening light, a freshly painted canvas glowing with defiant colors, Alara knew she was safe. But the price of that safety, the extent of her newfound dependence on the mafia boss, was only just beginning to unfold. She was free from the serpent of her past, only to find herself nestled irrevocably within the coils of another. And as the echoes of Julian's demise faded, a new kind of tension began to thrum in the quiet of the penthouse, a subtle hum of anticipation and a profound, thrilling apprehension for the unknown depths of her bond with Alessandro Rossi. The vast dining room of Alessandro Rossi's penthouse usually felt like a cavern of polished silence, each meticulously placed utensil on the gleaming table a stark reminder of the sterile, untouchable perfection of his world. Tonight, however, the silence was different. It hummed with an almost palpable tension, a fragile, unspoken energy that shimmered between Alara and the man seated at the head of the impossibly long table. Lyra was resting soundly in her private suite, her progress a constant, reassuring warmth in Alara's heart. That fact alone was a testament to Alessandro's power. The dead Alara acknowledged with a profound, almost dizzying gratitude. But gratitude, she was discovering, was a complex emotion when intertwined with the chilling intensity of the mafia boss. Alessandro had insisted they dine together. Not a command precisely, but a suggestion imbued with the weight of absolute authority. The food, a delicate French cuisine, was exquisite, yet Alara found herself pushing a perfectly seared scallop around her plate, her appetite a casualty of the unsettling intimacy of the moment. The soft glow of the chandelier cast long shadows, making his angular features appear even more formidable, more carved from granite. His dark eyes, usually sharp and assessing, seemed to hold a distant, almost melancholic depth tonight. "You are not eating, Alara." His voice, a low, resonant rumble, broke the protracted silence. It wasn't a question, but an observation devoid of accusation, yet demanding an answer. Alara startled, her gaze snapping up to meet his. She felt a familiar prickle of apprehension under his intense scrutiny. I'm not very hungry, Mr. Rossi." "Thank you." "Alessandro," he corrected, his voice firm, yet with a subtle undercurrent that suggested patience was a finite resource. "We are alone. The formality is unnecessary." She swallowed, the name feeling foreign on her tongue, too intimate for the man who controlled her every visible move. "Alessandro," she repeated, the name a hesitant whisper. "It's just a lot to process." He leaned back, his elbow resting on the table, his fingers steepled under his chin, observing her with an unnerving stillness. "The rapid dismantling of a parasitic empire?" he offered, a flicker of something that might have been grim amusement in his eyes. "Or the acquisition of a new, rather opulent home?" Alara felt a flush rise to her cheeks. He saw through her always. Both, perhaps, she admitted, her voice low. "And the swiftness of it all. It's terrifying. Your power." A heavy silence descended again, broken only by the faint clinking of cutlery from unseen staff clearing dishes in the distant kitchen. Alessandro's expression remained unreadable, but Alara felt the weight of his contemplation, the subtle shift in the air around him. It was as if he was deciding how much of himself to reveal, how much of his world to let her see. "Power, Alara," he finally said, his gaze fixed on the city lights far below, "is rarely a gift. More often, it is a burden. A cage of its own design." His voice was devoid of self-pity, merely stating a cold, unvarnished truth. Alara blinked, surprised by the unexpected introspection. She had always seen his power as absolute, effortless. To hear him speak of it as a burden, it chipped away at the marble facade, revealing a glimpse of the man beneath. "A cage?" she echoed softly, remembering her own feelings of entrapment. He turned his gaze back to her, and for the first time, Alara felt a profound, almost aching connection. "When you stand at the apex," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "everyone beneath you seeks something. Respect, fear, loyalty, favors, wealth. Trust becomes a luxury few can afford. Loneliness becomes a constant companion." He picked up his wine glass, swirling the dark liquid, his eyes distant. "I have built an empire, Alara. But empires are built on walls, and walls keep others out, even those you might desire to keep close." His words, raw and unadorned, hit Alara with the force of a physical blow. She saw for the first time, not the terrifying mafia boss, but a solitary man, weighed down by the very power that had saved her. He understood isolation. He understood the profound, aching loneliness of being misunderstood, of having to guard every thought, every feeling. It was a mirror to her own past, her own choice of invisibility. "I understand," she whispered, the words surprising even herself with their sincerity. "That's why I chose to be invisible." After Julian, his head snapped up, his dark eyes suddenly blazing with an intense, focused light. "Tell me," he commanded, his voice a low, urgent murmur. "Tell me everything. What did he do to you that made you hide so completely?" The air thickened, charged with the unspoken invitation to bare her soul. A profound fear coiled in her stomach, the old, familiar terror of opening up, of revealing her vulnerabilities only to have them exploited. But in Alessandro's gaze, there was no hint of judgment, only a deep, almost hungry need to understand, and a fierce protectiveness that, for once, felt safe. She took a shaky breath, the sense of expensive wine and his cologne suddenly more pronounced, intoxicating. "Julian, he didn't use physical violence," she began, her voice hoarse, the words scraping against her throat. "It was worse. It was psychological. He made me doubt myself, made me believe my raw style was unprofessional, chaotic, that only he could refine it, make it acceptable. He took my early works, claimed them as his own collaborations, subtly altering them, draining them of their soul, and then parading them as his genius." Her voice cracked with the remembered pain. "He told me I was too emotional to handle the art world, too naive, that people would take advantage of me. He said I was too pretty to be trusted on my own, that I needed his guidance, his protection. He controlled who I spoke to, where I went, what I wore. He chipped away at my confidence, piece by piece, until I believed I was nothing without him. Until I thought invisibility was the only way to protect myself, to keep my art pure, even if it meant burying it. The words tumbled out, a torrent of long-suppressed pain, raw and vulnerable. He stole my voice, Alessandro. And then he made me believe I didn't deserve to have one. As she spoke, Alessandro's expression darkened, his jaw tightening, a cold fury emanating from him that was terrifying to behold. It wasn't directed at her, but at the ghost of her tormentor. He listened, utterly still, absorbing every agonizing detail, his eyes burning with an unspoken promise of retribution. When she finished, the silence was absolute, heavy with the echoes of her past. He reached across the vast expanse of the table, his hand moving with a slow, deliberate grace. Alara flinched, a residual instinct of fear, but she didn't pull away. His long, elegant fingers settled over hers, warm and solid, a stark contrast to the coldness that Julian had inflicted. The contact was electric, sending a shiver through her, but it was a shiver of connection, not fear. "He made you hide," Alessandro murmured, his voice a low, dangerous growl, laced with a tenderness that stole her breath. "He took your light, made you believe it was a weakness. A fool." He squeezed her hand gently, grounding her. "You are not weak, Alara. You are fire. And no one gets to extinguish that." In that moment, a fragile, genuine trust blossomed between them, a delicate flower pushing through the hardened earth of their guarded exteriors. He saw her. He understood her. And he accepted her, scars and all. The mafia boss, the man of terrifying power and isolating burdens, had offered her not just protection, but comprehension. His thumb began to stroke the back of her hand, a slow, mesmerizing caress that sent a dizzying warmth through her veins. The air, already thick with emotion, became charged with an undeniable current of attraction. It was a silent conversation, a recognition of something primal and profound shifting between them. The fear was still there, a tiny, persistent whisper, but it was now overshadowed by a powerful, almost desperate pull, a longing for something she hadn't dared to dream of. His eyes, dark as midnight and suddenly softer than she had ever seen them, locked onto hers. The city lights outside blurred, fading into insignificance. There was only them, suspended in the intimate silence of the vast room, two guarded souls, finally finding a crack in their armor, yearning for connection that was both dangerous and utterly, irrevocably compelling. "Alara," he murmured, his voice a low, raw caress, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes. "You hide no longer. Not from me." His thumb continued its gentle rhythm on her skin, a silent promise, a potent invitation. The unspoken desire was a palpable force, vibrating between them, a spark ready to ignite. She felt herself leaning forward almost imperceptibly, drawn into his orbit, her breath catching in her throat. The golden cage, for the first time, felt less like a prison and more like a profound, dangerous sanctuary. And she, the once invisible artist, was ready to step fully into its intoxicating, terrifying embrace. The morning had dawned deceptively bright, a mockery of the storm that was about to break. Alara, after weeks nestled in the opulent cocoon of Alessandro's penthouse, had begun to crave the mundane, the illusion of a normal life. Lyra was thriving, her color returning, her laughter echoing in the previously silent halls. The studio was a haven, her art flourishing under Alessandro's implicit, unwavering patronage. Yet a restless flicker ignited within Alara, a longing for the simple anonymity of walking a street without the subtle, ever-present shadow of Alessandro's men, a desire to purchase a new brand of charcoal from a small art supply store herself, rather than having it appear magically on her easel. She convinced Dante, with a combination of logic and an almost childish plea for a normal errand, to let her go to a specific, out-of-the-way art shop known for its rare pigments. Dante, ever watchful, had reluctantly agreed, but only with two men discreetly trailing her, and strict instructions to return within 2 hours. Alara, giddy with a semblance of independence, saw it as a small victory, a crack in her gilded cage, allowing her a sliver of her former self. The chill of the autumn air, sharp and invigorating, felt wonderful against her cheeks as she navigated the bustling downtown streets. The smells of exhaust fumes, street food, and damp concrete were a strange comfort after the sterile perfection of the penthouse. She felt lighter, less a protected commodity, and more Alara. The art store, a charmingly cluttered space overflowing with paints and canvases, smelled delightfully of linseed oil and paper. She browsed, her fingers trailing over tubes of vibrant color, a small smile touching her lips. For a fleeting moment, the shadows of Vane, Julian, and even Alessandro's omnipresent power receded. She was just an artist, seeking inspiration. As she was about to pay for her selections, her phone, a burner Alessandro had insisted she carry, its number known only to a select few of his inner circle, buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Her heart skipped. She hesitated, a prickle of unease whispering at the back of her mind. Alessandro had warned her explicitly against answering unknown calls. But then a text message flashed on the screen, mimicking the urgency of the buzz. Lyra? Emergency. Your old apartment. No. Terror, sharp and immediate, twisted her gut. Lyra. Emergency. Her old apartment. It was a perfectly crafted lure, striking at her deepest vulnerability. Her mind raced, dismissing the lingering dread. Alessandro's men were with Lyra at the penthouse, weren't they? But the text mentioned her old apartment, a place outside Alessandro's immediate sphere, a place where Lyra might instinctively flee if something went wrong, a place that, despite its meager offerings, still held a subconscious sense of a past refuge. The men outside wouldn't know. They were told she had to return to the penthouse, not that Lyra was in danger. Panic seized her. She barely registered the cashier's confused look as she dropped her purchases, abandoning them. I need to go, she gasped, bolting out of the store. Her mind was a dizzying malethruff of fear for her sister. She hailed a taxi, her hands trembling as she gave her old address. She didn't see the discreet, black sedan that immediately pulled away from the curb across the street, its occupants watching her every move. She didn't notice the slight hesitation of Alessandro's two tailing men, who had been instructed not to interfere with her movements unless direct physical harm was imminent, and were now debating if this emergency warranted breaking their strict protocol. Her desperation had blinded her. The taxi dropped her 2 blocks from her old apartment, the narrow street lined with familiar, crumbling brick buildings. Her breath hitched in her throat as she saw it, the battered metal door of her old building, slightly ajar. A cold dread, a premonition of pure malice, washed over her. Too easy. Too quiet. Lyra, she called out, her voice thin and reedy as she pushed the door open, stepping into the dim, echoing hallway. The scent of dust and stale air filled her lungs. Lyra, are you here? No answer. Only the unnerving silence, broken by the frantic thumping of her own heart. A sense of profound wrongness, of being utterly alone and exposed, descended upon her. The subtle feeling of being watched, so familiar in the penthouse, was now raw and terrifying here, in this vulnerable, forgotten space. Just as she reached the second-floor landing, where her apartment door hung open slightly, a heavy hand clamped over her mouth. Another arm, thick and brutal, snaked around her waist, yanking her backward. Alara screamed, but the sound was muffled, swallowed by the sudden, suffocating force. Her small bag clattered to the floor, her newly bought art supplies spilling out, vibrant colors against the grimy linoleum. Thought you could hide from me, little muse? A voice sickeningly familiar and dripping with contempt whispered against her ear, sending a jolt of pure, icy horror through her. Julian. He smelled of cheap cologne and stale ambition. His grip was vice-like, painfully tight. Alara struggled, kicking and twisting, her vision blurring with adrenaline and sheer terror. Her mind screamed Alessandro, but the name felt like a futile prayer in this dark, suffocating hallway. He was far away, in his gleaming fortress. He couldn't possibly know. He couldn't possibly help her. Let go of me, she shrieked, managing to rip her mouth free for a desperate second, but another hand, rough and calloused, slapped over it again, pressing hard, stifling her. Quiet, bitch, a new voice snarled, one she didn't recognize. Then he stepped out of the shadows of her apartment, his face a contorted mask of vengeful glee, his eyes glinting with a savage satisfaction. You caused me enough trouble. Now you're going to pay for it. Both of you. He gestured, and 2 more hulking figures emerged from the apartment, their faces grim, their intentions clear. Alara's world tilted. Panic, cold and absolute, gripped her. They weren't just going to hurt her. They were going to use her. Against Alessandro. Against Lyra? The thought was unbearable. She tasted blood from her bitten lip, her body shaking uncontrollably. She was utterly, completely helpless. They dragged her back into her old apartment, slamming the door shut, plunging her into a terrifying darkness. The last thing she saw before the door clicked shut was a faint splash of vibrant red paint from a crushed tube, bleeding into the dust on the hallway floor, a silent, bleeding testament to the sudden, brutal end of her fragile freedom. Her mind screamed Alessandro's name, a silent, desperate plea for a rescue she was certain would never come. She was lost. Truly lost. Miles away, in the cool control command center of his penthouse, Alessandro Rossi's phone rang with a chilling urgency. It was Dante, his voice tight, strained. "Don Rossi, we have a problem." Alara, she left her tail. Went to her old apartment. We lost visual. The men, they said she got a text about an emergency with Lyra. The receiver felt like ice in Alessandro's hand. Lyra was upstairs, safe, sound asleep. Trap. A cold, calculated trap. He felt a slow, terrible rage begin to unfurl within him, a primal beast stirring from its slumber. His face, usually a mask of controlled indifference, contorted into something dangerous, lethal. His eyes, dark as the abyss, narrowed to slits, reflecting the terrifying realization that settled over him. They had dared. They had touched what was his. "Find her, Dante," Alessandro commanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl that promised immediate, brutal retribution. His composure shattered, replaced by the terrifying, unbridled fury of a mafia boss whose most precious possession had been violated. "Every man, every resource. Tear this city apart if you have to. Find her. And when you find the ones who took her, bring them to me. Alive. I want them to understand the price of touching what belongs to Alessandro Rossi." The lines in his face deepened, carved by cold, unstoppable determination, a terrifying darkness that promised vengeance beyond imagining. Alara was gone, and the world was about to burn. The penthouse, usually a sanctuary of controlled silence, now vibrated with a terrifying, coiled energy. Alessandro Rossi stood in his command center, the panoramic screens that typically displayed stock market fluctuations now a grid of flickering surveillance feeds, city maps, and frantic comms chatter. His face was a mask of granite, carved by an unholy wrath that burned in the depths of his obsidian eyes. Lyra, sleeping soundly in her suite, was a distant, irrelevant thought. His entire world had narrowed to one agonizing truth. Alara was gone, and those who had dared to take her would pay a price beyond imagining. Every camera feed, Dante, he rasped, his voice a low, dangerous growl that sent shivers down the spines of the battle-hardened men surrounding him. Every cell tower ping, every informant. I want a name. I want a location. Now. The air crackled with desperate urgency. Operators, their faces pale with unspoken fear, worked with frantic efficiency. His men, the most ruthless and loyal in his network, moved with a silent, deadly purpose, deploying across the city, tearing apart its underbelly piece by piece. They knew the Dawn's fury. They knew that when Alessandro Rossi's possessions were threatened, the city itself became a battlefield, and no quarter was given. Alara's world, meanwhile, was darkness and the acrid stench of stale cigarettes. She lay bound on a cold, concrete floor, the rough ropes chafing her wrists and ankles. The last lingering taste of blood in her mouth was a stark reminder of Julian's brutal hand. He in vain had dragged her into this abandoned warehouse, its cavernous interior amplifying every creak, every distant siren, transforming them into harbingers of doom. Julian's chilling whispers, a renewed torrent of psychological abuse, mingled with Vane's venomous threats, twisting her terror into a sickening knot of despair. They wanted to use her to record her forced renunciation of Alessandro, to break her, to send a message. She closed her eyes, tears of pure terror silently tracking paths down her temples. She was just a pawn. And Alessandro, he was too far away. He wouldn't find her. He couldn't. Alessandro, however, was not far. He was a storm, gathering force. Dante's voice, terse and precise, finally cut through the static. "Don Rossi, we have a ping. An abandoned textile warehouse, old industrial district. Vane's old contacts for illegal art forgery. Cross-referenced with a known burner phone Julian Moreau activated this morning." Alessandro's eyes, already burning, sharpened to lethal points. Vane. Julian. The parasitic shadows of her past, now coalescing into a single, tangible target. Mobilize Sector Gamma. "Dante, you're with me." There was no hesitation, no wasted breath. The decision was made. The beast was unleashed. The convoy of armored black SUVs sliced through the city streets, a dark, unstoppable force. Alessandro drove, the powerful engine a purring beast beneath his hands, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The silence in the car was heavy, broken only by the low crackle of comms. His men knew not to speak, not to break his terrifying focus. Every fiber of his being was geared towards one objective, reclaiming what was his. He saw Alera's face, pale and terrified, superimposed over the flashing city lights, and a fresh wave of blinding fury surged through him. They had dared. They reached the warehouse. The air outside was cold, carrying the metallic tang of neglect and the faint, unsettling scent of an active human presence. Alessandro didn't wait. He moved like a dark phantom, leading his men with brutal efficiency. There were guards, foolishly positioned, quickly, silently dispatched. The creak of a distant metal door, the thud of a body, the sharp snap of bone, sounds that would sicken an ordinary man, but to Alessandro, they were merely the necessary symphony of retrieval. He breached the main entrance, his movements fluid, deadly. The warehouse was dimly lit by a few bare bulbs, casting long, menacing shadows. He saw them vain, his face contorted in a sneer, a camera aimed at Alera, who was slumped bound against a stack of crates. Julian, his hand gripping her jaw, forcing her head up, his eyes gleeful. And two more thugs flanking them. A primal roar ripped from Alessandro's throat, the sound of pure, unadulterated rage that shattered the stale air. Get away from her. Vane and Julian flinched, their heads snapping up, their faces paling in utter terror as they saw the figure framed in the doorway, a force of nature unleashed. The mafia boss, his eyes blazing, a lethal promise etched in every hard line of his face. Chaos erupted. Alessandro moved like a whirlwind of controlled violence. He didn't waste time on threats. A thug lunged. Alessandro's fist connected with his temple with sickening force, sending him sprawling, unconscious before he hit the ground. Another tried to draw a knife. Alessandro disarmed him with a swift, brutal twist, the blade clattering uselessly to the floor as the man screamed, his wrist undoubtedly shattered. Vane, paralyzed by fear, stumbled backward. Julian, realizing the futility of resistance, tried to use Alera as a shield, his arm wrapping tightly around her throat. "Stay back, Rossi, or she gets hurt," he shrieked, his voice cracking with desperation. But Alessandro didn't stop. His eyes, fixed solely on Alera, burned with a terrifying, cold certainty. He moved towards Julian with the unstoppable momentum of a juggernaut. Julian squeezed, and Alera gasped, her vision dimming. Then Alessandro was there. He didn't hesitate. A precise, brutal strike to Julian's knee, a sound of sickening crunching bone, made Julian roar in agony and release Alera. As Julian collapsed, Alessandro's other hand, a blur of motion, snatched Alera, pulling her protectively behind him. His foot, clad in an expensive leather shoe, connected with Julian's jaw, a short, sharp crack that rendered him unconscious before he could even scream again. Vane, utterly devoid of defiance, fell to his knees, babbling pleas for mercy. Alessandro ignored him. His entire focus was on Alera. He turned, his large hands immediately cupping her face, his thumbs gently stroking her tear-streaked cheeks. Her ropes, cut with swift, practiced precision by Dante, fell away. Alera was trembling violently, her eyes wide with shock and a profound, overwhelming relief. She launched herself into his arms, burying her face against his chest, clutching at his tailored suit jacket as if he were the last anchor in a raging storm. The scent of him, rich cologne, smoke, and something uniquely, fiercely male, filled her senses, a powerful balm to her terror. "Alessandro," she sobbed, her voice muffled against his chest, the word a desperate, broken prayer. "You came. I thought you wouldn't." His arms, strong and possessive, wrapped around her, pulling her impossibly closer, crushing her against his hard frame. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling her scent, his entire body shaking with a barely restrained tremor. His relief was a palpable force, raw, primal roar that vibrated through her. "Never," he growled, his voice rough with emotion, laced with an untamed, possessive ferocity that thrilled her even in her terror. "Never again will anyone touch you. You are mine, Alera, and I will burn the world to ashes if anyone dares to forget that." His embrace tightened, claiming her, absorbing her fear, stamping his undeniable, terrifying ownership upon her very soul. She was safe. She was his. And the price of touching what belonged to him was about to be paid, In fire and blood, we all carry hidden scars, whispers of past hurts that make us shrink, make us want to disappear. Alara's journey reminds us that the quietest battles are often the most profound. Her past tried to silence her, to render her invisible, but a soul meant to blaze can never truly be extinguished. Her story, much like a vibrant canvas, paints a truth we often forget. The wounds inflicted by others do not define your worth. Alessandro, the formidable mafia boss, didn't just save her from danger. He saw beyond her art, beyond her fear, to the unyielding fire within. He showed her that true love isn't about control, but fierce, unwavering protection, allowing her to reclaim her voice, her power, and her undeniable place in the world. If Alara's triumph resonated with the fighter in your own heart, if you believe in love that heals and empowers, join our community. Hit like, subscribe, and let the world know in the comments. I am seen.